What's up everyone, this is Elektron, and today I'm going to show you how to correctly use reverb. But before we get into that, on Thursday, in about 4 days, I'll be shooting a track feedback video, and I need 4 songs from 4 different people to use in that video. Here's how you could be one of those songs. Go to my SoundCloud, check out my latest song called Cleanup Game that I did with Lauren Panic. Like and repost that song. I'm going to go through the people who reposted the song, pick 4 random people who reposted it, slide in your DMs, and we'll talk about a song that you would like me to use in my video on Thursday. So let's get into this video. Now, reverb is very easy to mess up, and it's almost too easy to mess up, too easy to get wrong. And a lot of the time I hear reverb just being done really incorrectly. A couple things to understand about reverb is that you have to keep it as simple as you could possibly keep it, because it's one of the hardest things to mix because it lasts the longest usually and overlaps everything. So like if you have a lead with reverb right before like a second lead or something, the reverb from the first lead is gonna carry over and kind of layer over top of the second lead for some amount of time. What you want to avoid is that reverb that's overlapping to be too much or to be too heavy, or you want to avoid having too many different reverbs, too many different sounding reverbs, because then the reverbs don't mix. When your entire reverb selection blends in with itself throughout your whole track, you get a nicely mixed track. Whereas if you have leads that are wetter than your snare, or if you have chords that are wetter than your leads, your entire mix can just sound off balance. So I'm in the project of Cleanup Game actually, and what I'm gonna do is show you how to add reverb to a vocal, show you how to add reverb to a snare that might be under that vocal or just other drums in the mix. Then I'm gonna show you how to add reverb to something like low frequency chords. So let's go into the vocal here. This is the dry vocal, sounds like this.
I don't wanna dance.
Now with vocals, a lot of the times you would use a delay. So it's a very good thing to add the delay before you add the reverb. If you add reverb before the delay, it just kind of makes the delay really muddy, and then it messes your reverb sound up. So let's go ahead and add delay. And now we're gonna add our reverb. I would recommend using reverb through a bus. This is the best way you can do it because it kind of forces you to keep your reverbs aligned and similar. What you want to do is you go to send, add a bus. I'm going to use bus 22 because I already set it up earlier. And then you want to go ahead and add your reverb plugin of choice. Let's just use Space Designer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the wet knob all the way up, come up here, and find a nice reverb setting, a nice reverb preset that would sound good for my entire track. When you're adding reverb, think of your entire song. Don't think of one sound, what one sound is going to sound like with reverb, because that literally means nothing relative to other sounds in your song. So use a reverb setting that might work with your song. If it's more of a euphoric, spacey track, use a heavy reverb. If it's more of a, popular, simple track, use a lighter reverb, something that doesn't have a lot of decay, doesn't have a lot of sound. Let's use for this track, I forget what I use, so let's just try to use something a little bit longer, soft haul, but not like too long. Put our wet all the way up, and I always like to put my crossover all the way up as well, because it makes the reverb bigger, it makes it wider, at least in this plugin it does. And everything else, my pre-delay, I always keep that at 0. So let's go ahead and apply the reverb now. So here's our dry signal with delay.
I don't wanna dance.
You definitely don't want it to be that dry. So what we're gonna do,
I don't wanna dance. You always cancel plans.
just add it until you just start to hear it. Maybe add a little bit more.
I don't wanna dance.
You don't want it to be too obvious, because what happens is when you go into the mastering stage, some settings that you do in the mastering stage, if you have somebody who's good at mastering, like a mastering engineer, or if you're good at mastering yourself, sometimes, or a lot of times, the reverbs and delays kind of get pushed out from behind the vocal, depending on your mastering engineer, that is, and it kind of makes everything a little louder. So it's okay to go a tad bit light when adding a reverb to a vocal.
I don't wanna dance.
So let's use that for now. And there's one more thing that you have to keep in mind when adding reverb. This is the most important thing. Go into the EQ of the reverb. Every reverb plugin has an EQ option, and you're gonna high cut and you're gonna low cut that reverb. So this is kind of where you want your reverb to shine. If this was an EQ, which it is, this is where you want your reverb to shine. Too many high frequencies and your reverb is going to crash into your drums, the tops of your drums, which are the most important parts of your drums, and your reverb might crash into the tops of your leads, which could be the most important part of your leads too. So let's hop into our main drums here. So obviously the drums are bone dry, so what we're going to do is come down to send, go into bus 22, where we have our reverb plugin that's EQ'd like this. The wet knob is all the way up, the dry is all the way down, because we're using a bus. If you were using reverb on the channel, you would have the dry all the way up. Then we have our other settings looking good. Let's go ahead and apply some reverb to our clap. Very, very important when you're adding reverb to a snare. And I hear this done quite often. When you're adding reverb to a snare, don't add too much reverb. You can't have that be too wet. So if you're gonna shoot for having it either too wet or too dry, and you don't really know what it should be, shoot for having your snare too dry. It's just easier to hear. If your snare is too wet, it takes away from the purpose of the snare, which is its transient. Anything too wet loses its transient, but you really don't want to lose this snare's transient. To give you an idea what a transient is, it's this like little ball of fire right here. That kind of crash, that little punchy sound there. So keep that in mind. And there is your snare reverb. If you add reverb to your snare and you can't hear it in your mix, let's go into our chords. Big chords, you don't always need reverb on them, especially if they're very low frequency like these are. But a lot of the times chords show a lot of high frequencies, and if they do show a lot of high frequencies, reverb might be a good idea for that. Maybe. Not all the time though, because your chords, chances are if you have a big lead sound over top of the chords, which I do, then your chords, you would want them to be kind of stiff and tight. You wouldn't want them to be too loose with a lot of reverb. But these chords, we can add a tiny bit of reverb to this. We don't want these to be as wet as the leads. If they're as wet as the leads, then they're not going to sound like they're a good foundation. They're going to sound really wet. So let's just add a little bit. When you get like a tiny bit of reverb like that, it kind of keeps the whole chord sound kind of flowing and never stopping. But you definitely want your dry signal to be the prominent signal here. So here's a couple things to kind of remember about reverb that I didn't go over in here. If you're a big preset user, if you're a big sound bank user, a lot of the times presets and sound banks are preset with reverb. Get rid of that reverb, turn it off, and be in control of the reverb. So I hope that makes sense, guys. Remember to keep your reverbs consistent, keep them simple. You don't have to overcomplicate them. Remember to EQ them. Remember that if you're a preset user, it might be a better idea to turn off the reverb on any preset and add your own reverb. So there you go, guys. That's how to properly use reverb. I'm Alex Rome. I hope you took some value from this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up, comment your thoughts in the comments section, and stay tuned for more stuff. Peace out.